Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Father Moo here. Well, I usually stream on the Nord Micro Modular and build a patch, and it takes me about 30 minutes. That's a pretty long video to watch or to commit to watching. So I thought I would go in and make some shorter videos where I just pick one of my mainstay strategies or one of my fallback to strategies that I use a lot, and just explain that as quickly and simply as I can. And I'm going to do that in a way, you can see here on the screen, I'm using the Nord Micro Modular software. But if you're using VCV Rack, if you're using a Eurorack modular, if you're using Reactor or any other digital or real-world modular system, you'll be able to apply these tricks and adapt them to that system if you think about it. So yeah, let's just get started with our first little trick here today. So I've built a very common sort of system. I've got a LFO here. I've got a clock generator here. It's driving a note sequencer, which is quantizing the notes into standard sort of melodic scale. And that's driving a single oscillator going into a single filter and into an AD envelope, a two-stage envelope. And following that, we do have a digitizer, but we're bypassing that right now. Then we're going straight into a mixer and into the output so you can hear the sound. Over here, we also have synced up an event sequencer, which is driving a kick and a snare, a two-voice drum pattern, which we'll get to a little later. So before we even play the kick and the snare, let's just hear the sequence, which again it's a random sequence. I hit the random button here, generated a bunch of notes, forced them into a common key, and then fed them to the pitch of the oscillator. So by turning on the clock gen, we should be able to hear that. Okay, so somewhat boring 16-note sequence. So let's go ahead and apply the first of Father Moo's little musical tricks here. The key is to get this kind of LFO. By that I mean a random LFO which has squared off edges. Not a smooth LFO, but this is often called a sample and hold LFO. Because in the old days, if you had a sample and hold module and you sent it a clock and then you sampled a noise source every time the clock had a beat, it would give you an output that looked like this. So this will give you, as I said, random high or low pitch notes, but every time the clock changes, the random value changes. So why did I choose this LFO? Because this is going to give me a certain element of rhythm, which I'm trying to add to my sequence to make it more interesting. So I want to give the sequence variation, but I don't want it to be out of time with the music. In fact, I want it to be in time with the music in order to help the beat move along. So as you can see, the clock here is feeding from the same clock coming out of the clock generator, so they're all happening in time. You don't need to worry about these knobs here. They just these two buttons just determine the amount of variation. But we can do that with the amount knob that we're feeding into. So let's look at some of the destinations today that this clocked random LFO can feed into. The first and most common one is going to be the frequency input. This should give you a sound which sounds a little bit more like a 303, because the 303 often could have a random LFO fed to its filter frequency. So let's hear that before and after. Here's before. Okay, and after. So you can hear the LFO is opening and closing the frequency a random amount, and it's doing it every time it gets a clock pulse or on every beat. In some cases, that means that the filter is so closed down that it almost doesn't play a note at all. And that's because it's so far to the left and the pitch may be somewhat high that the filter scoops out the entire note. At other times, if the filter is completely open, you'll hear the note clearly. So I'm going to play that again as it is, and this time I'm going to unmute my drums so you can hear what the drum pattern is doing. In fact, let's start with the drums. Or I guess it'll all be together. Here we go. So you could hear the boom, clap, sort of simple pattern. But again, because the LFO is modulating the filter on the 16th note, it's almost doing the job of the hi-hats in a way and filling in those individual beats. So that was the filter setting. Let's look at some other typical destinations we can send this clocked random LFO to. I have it set to a sawtooth wave in the oscillator, but what if we set it to a square wave and send the same or a similar clocked LFO to the pulse width modulation? Usually the input here will be fed by a sine wave, which is moving slowly, but if you feed it this clocked one, you'll get another pattern that modulates on the beat, which again will help to establish a rhythm. Here we go. So when the filter is way down or when the pulse width is quite thin, again, you're going to get almost not even a note at all. You're going to just get a click on that 16th note hit. But again, it still gives a certain rhythmic intensity to it that I think is useful. Let's try another one here. Over here, as I said, I have the digitizer. This one has a bit reducer and a sample rate reducer. Well, the bit reducer is turned off, so don't worry about that. Let's turn the sample rate reducer on, and right now we have the sample rate at its maximum amount, so it doesn't really change the sound at all. However, if you send a LFO from here, a clocked LFO, into the input of the sample rate, it will reduce the sample rate, and again, do it on the 16th notes, so you'll get a kind of glitchy or Game Boy or stuttering kind of sound that happens rhythmically. So let's start without it. These two are still being modulated. Here comes the sample rate. That's good. Let's try turning it up a bit. So you could hear that some of those were completely glitched out or even just obliterated by the sample rate going really low. So if you like a cleaner sound, you can leave the amount something like that. If you like the glitchier sound, you can open it up more. Again, it totally depends. If you're using a different modular system, you'll need to tweak the amount to get that right. And I have one more parameter today that I'd like to modulate with a clocked random LFO. And that is the resonance amount. I was talking about getting a 303 type sound. If you modulate the resonance as well, you have another sort of quirky, or how can I describe it, almost squelchy kind of filter sound that will go along with our 16th beat pattern. So that'll be our fourth one, and we'll hear all four of these modulations happening at once. Here we go. Actually, it's a little bit hard to hear with all the other four going on, but trust me, having this modulation for resonance will certainly be a useful option. So I can't tell you all the destinations. For me, the most common are filter frequency, filter resonance, pulse width if we're a square wave, and sample rate if we have a digitizer. Some other options you might consider would be using a wave wrapper or a distortion module. And if you use, or this one here is called overdrive, if you send a clocked random LFO to either of these inputs, you'll get similar interesting rhythmic patterns. And I don't know what all oscillators are out there in the world. Here in the Nord modular, we have the spectral osc, which has an input for spectral shape, and that one also benefits from being connected to the clocked random LFO. But if you're not using a Nord micromodular at home, just find other possible inputs, try modulating them with clocked random LFOs. The LFO you don't want to use is just a random step generator like this, which would output random notes, but if it's not actually clocked to a tempo, if it doesn't have a clock input like this, then it's not going to be in time with your music unless you get very lucky with the speed and manage to line it up, but that's unlikely. So if you have an LFO with this kind of shape, just make sure it's receiving a clock from your system and feeding your outputs. If you were doing this in Eurorack, I'm pretty sure any of the versions of Pamela's Workout or New Workout or Pro will have a clocked random LFO output that would do the job. So yeah, this has been a quick tip from Father Moo. Hope you found it useful, and we'll have some more quick tips in the pipeline. So check them out. Thanks for listening. See you next time.